This is going to be one of my videos in my extended Bible series, where I delve into the Bible in detail, looking at each section and breaking down the prophecies, the visions, the stories and the accounts with what we know historically and what science has discovered for us, as well as what the Bible itself tells us. If this is the sort of video you're interested in, please like and share it with your friends. The more discussion we have, the better. Any thoughts you have, please leave in the comments. And if you're that sort of person who likes to stay up to date with things, please consider subscribing to the channel. Apart from that, I hope you enjoyed the video.
The house of Jacob is one of the most famous clans of the Old Testament, after Adam and Abraham. Some may well say that it's a thieves' house, due to the name of the patriarch, and that he had stolen not only the birthright of his brother Esau, but also his blessing to be the new patriarch. But it was also a hard-won house, since Jacob had to work many years of hard labour to gain his wives and to raise his family, even after he had built up his wealth to be a prosperous man of the world. This is an aspect of the story that isn't explored in many open studies, so I will be looking at this with that in mind, especially as I haven't found any of those studies myself. I shall be asking these questions. Why did Jacob have so many wives? How did he grow his wealth? And why did he eventually have to flee? Since that time is one of a well-established writing system and oral traditions, I'm not sure what the origin source of this story is. A mixture of bardic tales with more detailed accounts to fill in the details seems likely, but I really don't know. Since the phrasing doesn't seem so important in this section, except in a couple of odd places, I'm more inclined to the oral stories. But that is just a speculation I'm not sure really matters at this stage. But with all that said, let us begin. A good place to start would be when Isaac sent Jacob away from home, partly because his mother claimed to dislike the Hittite women of Canaan, but mostly because she knew if he remained in the region, his brother Esau would kill him. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take a wife there of the daughters of your uncle Laban. Leaving home to take a wife elsewhere is mentioned in earlier chapters, and is often misconstrued as only man and woman being able to marry. It's merely a custom to ensure that the son can flourish like his father. An example of this is when Abraham sent his nephew Lot away, so their flocks can graze comfortably. If they remain in the same place, they would not be able to feed their sheep adequately. As a result, they parted ways. Interestingly enough, we also get a reference to the house of Jacob before it even begins properly. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. Other translations have it as a company, multitude, or congregation of peoples, and some to a gathering of nations. This shows a sizable clan shall rise from Jacob's loins and be well known as the Forefathers of Israel. Since the phrasing is so broad, I can't use it to literally mean a great house, but it fits with the names of the patriarchs living on past the natural lifespans of years that they most likely would have had themselves, even though the Bible genealogy actually says they lived for hundreds of years. So Jacob travelled eastward, and duly came to the covered well of the shepherds in the area. Due to it being the custom for the shepherds to all gather before the well was uncovered for their flocks to drink, and only a few flocks were around it, when Laban's daughter, Rachel, came to water the sheep, the well remained covered. Now this is where the text is a bit confusing, as to me it implies an account rather than a story. Jacob said, "Look at the sun, it's still high, and no time for flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." They replied, "We can't until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." This back and forth between Jacob and the shepherds sounds like either an argument or a discussion about whether they should water the sheep that Rachel brought, or whether they should wait until all were gathered. Why Jacob brought this up implies he is a stranger and doesn't know the customs. It's also worthwhile mentioning that he was actually concerned for the welfare of the sheep, since this was the hottest part of the day and they had no water. I should know from working with horses that animals of that caliber need a lot of water. If you don't give them water during the hottest part of the day, it's all too easy for them to die. And these are the men's livelihoods. If animals die, then they lose an important part of their revenue. It could be this fact alone that prevented the men of the region from stopping Jacob from what he did next. While he was still talking with them, Rachel came up with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, his uncle's daughter, and his sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well, and watered the sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, and began to weep aloud. Throughout this passage, we get a strong sense that Jacob was deeply in love with Rachel, and that's why he flouts the customs of the people he was debating with, and opening the well. Nothing said openly at this point, but anyone can see that Jacob loves her dearly and desires her as a wife. This is super important and gets confirmed later on in the text. But this implies some things are better to impress upon people early, rather than just state out of the blue. His infatuation is clear when he negotiates with Laban for Rachel's hand in marriage. Jacob was in love with Rachel, and he said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." This may seem strange by modern standards, but back in those days, showing that you could provide for your family is important to gain the approval of the father of your intended bride. In some cultures at the time, giving a portion of your wealth to the father demonstrates how much you have to care and provide for your bride and the children you'll eventually have. That is the bride price. In this instance, Jacob is asked to work 7 years as a shepherd for his uncle. Perfectly reasonable, and it gives him a chance to show off what skills he already has. This, however, leads to a sort of double cross. Instead of giving him his beloved Rachel, Laban gives him his eldest daughter, Leah, as it was the custom for the people in the East to marry their daughters off in age order. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this that you have done to me? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one." Jacob's reaction could be seen as justified in some cases, since he had worked all those years for Rachel's hand, not Leah's. Others might say he was being unreasonable. They were only going by traditions of their people. He should respect that. But either way, I think it shows Jacob's strength of character. That instead of raging or taking his chosen woman and running for the hills, he agreed to give his new wife the bridal week, as was the custom, and then work a further 7 years to earn Rachel. Yes, he was angry at the deception and having to work the extra years, but who can blame him for that? Certainly not me. Sadly, this bled over into his relationship with Leah, who bore him 4 sons, yet still wished for his affection. Leah conceived and gave birth to a son, Reuben. She said, "This is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." Her distress is what likely causes God to make Rachel barren, though this didn't stop either woman from trying to please Jacob by ordering their handmaidens to sleep with him, giving him more sons. This is most likely why he is depicted with many wives, though it's unlikely that many people in Genesis officially married more than once. Whilst it was only enforced in Leviticus that they should only have a single wife, it wouldn't surprise me if those in Genesis and Exodus were polyamorous. Wouldn't surprise me at all. It certainly wouldn't be considered wrong for the patriarchs, the nobles, and the kings. They can flout rules whenever they like. During this time, he worked well with his uncle and learned further how to care for and breed the sheep. He even introduced a neat way of separating the flocks as way of payment for his work. "Let me go through your flocks today, and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-coloured lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages." This implies an understanding of selective breeding, and shows, in my opinion, that microevolution is not unknown to the biblical people. All that aside, however, one could ask what the deal is with single and light-coloured animals being for Laban, while the speckled and dark animals being for Jacob. One could give the argument that he knew which colours were more common and so would be more likely to breed. It could be a revenue ploy, since single-coloured animals have uniform skin colour and so would be more desirable to make clothes and other accessories from, since they are much easier to make into patterns and simpler to dye. I don't know for sure, but I would guess some theologians would say that the light single-coloured sheep represent purity, whilst the darker marked sheep represented sinfulness. This could lead to a number of conclusions, in particular that Laban was looking for perfection where it was scarce, whilst Jacob knew such a mindset wouldn't be sustainable in the long run and went for the rest of them. This could be a lesson in purity, which can result in inbreeding, though I would say it shows that being too strict about being pure and untainted will only cause the numbers to dwindle and die out. I'm willing to admit here that after looking through this and comparing it to text, I'm not entirely sure this is true, but even so, it's worthwhile bearing in mind, with so many people being obsessed with being pure of heart and yet causing suffering around them. This is an important lesson to learn anyway, regardless of where it crops up in the Bible. One thing to note about Jacob at this point is that he clearly knows some herb lore, since he used local plants in the sheep's water troughs, which potentially acted as an arousal agent as they came on heat and started mating. Translations differ on what plants be used, but the Hebrew translations suggests hazel is a likely candidate, though modern studies are lacking in the areas of pregnancy and lactation, which is what I believe they would have promoted. Poplar, almond, and plane trees are the most common translations, but I've seen chestnuts, evergreen, storax, walnut, and even maple among the botanical array of doping flora that Jacob prepared and used to get his flocks in heat. I haven't checked to see if any of these have such properties or side effects, but the fact it's done multiple times with the same effect is a sign that it's working, and the basis of a scientific conclusion is repetitive results. Add that to the fact that you could see a clear method to how Jacob prepared the branches and put them in the water, shows he was taught well and knew how to prepare the plants. This mixture of doping his livestock and careful selective breeding is what made Jacob's wealth boom. Soon he had vast flocks of sheep, goats, cattle, donkeys, and even camels. And of course, he had to have loads of people to look after him, so a huge workforce behind him. He was a man of industry of the day. This may well have led to Laban's sons being envious of Jacob's prospects, and believing he had stolen their inheritance. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, "Jacob has taken everything our father earned, and has gained all the wealth from what belonged to our father." And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude towards him was not what it had been. Whilst Laban's view of Jacob was ambiguous in the text, in the context of his son's animosity towards Jacob, this indicates that he is of the same mind. Considering that he was openly glad to see Jacob when he first arrived, embracing him and kissing him, this is a marked change, and certainly one that wouldn't be good to remain in proximity to. One can debate whether God appeared to Jacob and tell him to get the heck out of there, but since it took him a number of breeding seasons to notice the subtle undermining of their agreement, it seems that Jacob did need the proverbial knock on the head to get a move on and uproot his family. So that is what they did. He sent a message to his wives, they gathered the children, gathered their belongings, presumably their livestock and servants, and fled, heading back to Jacob's homeland. So, to answer the questions, why did Jacob have so many wives? It didn't seem to be his intention to wed so many women, unlike many others I can think of. In this case, however, he was tricked into sleeping with one woman, and instead of turning her out, he kept her as the custom allowed. When neither woman was able to bear children, which was the perceived purpose of intercourse, they gave him their maidservants to bed. Whether they would count as wives in the strictest sense is debatable, so he most certainly had 2 wives, though the other 2 counted. I'm willing to debate in the comments. How did his wealth grow? Material wealth is hard for us to judge these days without putting a unit of currency on it. By looking at the text, we can deduce that Jacob used a mixture of animal husbandry, herb law, and selective breeding to nurture his flocks and herds to the point where he had more than Laban. This is where we need to remember that he had learned not just from Laban, but also the women of his father's tribe under his mother. And that would most likely include animal care and knowledge of herbs. So it wasn't just his father's blessing that gave him his wealth, but also his mother's teachings. Important to remember. Why did he eventually have to flee? This is a good question, since many wealthy people rarely bother moving once they are well set up in a good spot. You could say, however, that it's precisely because he was wealthy that he had to leave. Not only for reasons of safety, since Laban and his sons were less than happy at his success, but possibly reasons of sustainability. The translation I read for the purpose of this study didn't indicate if he took his livestock with him or not. But if he did, it would make sense that they would need a lot of land to graze them, and that would not always have been available in Padan Aram. Add that to the fact that Laban seemed determined to reclaim the flocks by crafty increase of what amounted to tax, and you can see it was better for Jacob to up stakes and return to his homeland with his family. It's quite possible Laban's sons wouldn't have been so subtle about it, but that we can't say for sure. Many people would give the name of Jacob a nasty twist due to the Hebrew translation, literally meaning to take advantage of. But if he did take advantage, it wasn't of any one person, with the possible exception of Isaac, though that was more his mother's doing. What he did take advantage of was his knowledge, the knowledge that he picked up from his own people and used to boost his prospects. It wasn't as if it was an easy road, since his lack of knowledge of the area he was going to, and lack of care for one wife, landed him with more wives and children than many in this modern age would deem appropriate. And that was after many years of hard work, closely followed by jealous hoarding and skimping on deals by his uncle. He had a hard road, but that is often the road that leads to the greatest rewards. As I often say, if we only want to have an easy bike ride, we can never see the views or earn the downhill stretches. That is something I think we can all learn from. Yes, things can be hard work, but at the end of the day, if we work hard, we will get the greatest rewards.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like, share and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching, and God bless.